Hi, everyone. It's Sandra. I'm excited to talk to you about auditory training. But first, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my story. You see, I almost killed a dog once. In fact, I almost killed dogs on a daily basis. I was so frustrated after 11 years of working in a busy private practice audiology clinic fitting hearing aids that I applied for a management position at the SPCA. When they offered me the job, I seriously considered leaving audiology and accepting the position. Every day, I would have to select which dogs to put down. I couldn't even imagine how I was going to be able to do that. What was I thinking? I clearly needed a way out. Big part of my frustration had to do with my own severe to profound hearing loss. Communication was full of effort, and I had to talk to clients and coworkers every minute of the day. I was born with normal hearing. My hearing loss was detected in early childhood, and it progressed quickly. By the time I was a teenager, my hearing loss was severe to profound in both ears. As an audiologist, I've always had access to the very best technology. But even though I had really good technology, my communication difficulties remained. I used the phone only in emergencies. At work, someone would have to check my voicemail for me. I avoided drive-through windows at fast food restaurants because they always asked so many questions. I couldn't understand children or people with accents. I avoided most social situations, especially if the noise levels were going to be too high or if I would have to speak to people that I didn't know. Every day I came home from work exhausted. And every year, my world got smaller and smaller. And then in 2006, I received a cochlear implant. I got my cochlear implant on a Friday, and I immediately went home and launched into my own do-it-yourself auditory training program. I spent the next 3 days immersed in training my brain to hear again. My cheeks hurt from having the biggest smile on my face the whole time. On Sunday night, my ex-husband arrived home from a ski weekend and said, "Who are you? And what have you done with my wife?" Not only could I hear better after only 3 days, but my eyes were shining. I was beyond happy. The new and improved technology was a big part of that. But if I had sat back waiting for my cochlear implant to produce results, my eyes would not have been shining. Now I had something I could work with. It became part of my own solution. I gained back the control that had been taken from me. And I discovered the very definition of life with hope. You put in effort and things get better. This principle of through your own efforts, your life can change became the cornerstone of my business, HEARa, which is focused on helping adults with acquired hearing loss to reach their full potential. Of all of the tools that I use to support people with hearing loss, I consider auditory training to be the most important one. Before I cover the specific auditory training programs out there for people with hearing loss, I wanted to talk about analytic versus synthetic approaches to auditory training. Analytic approaches emphasize the recognition of speech sounds or syllables. The idea is to work on the basic parts of speech, sounds, and syllables before the whole can be identified. Synthetic approaches emphasize the comprehension of meaning and not necessarily the comprehension of every word. Synthetic approaches use sentence stimuli rather than sounds, syllables, and words. So, which is better, analytic or synthetic? There's not much research to answer that question. Probably a better question is, who needs analytic and who needs synthetic training? Unfortunately, there's not much research for that question either. This is HEARa's model of auditory skill development. The first level of auditory skill development is detection. Can they detect sound? We overcome issues of detection with hearing aids and cochlear implants. The next level is discrimination. Do you know that one sound is different from another sound? We pretty much assume that you're going to be able to if you have properly fitted hearing aids. But this isn't necessarily so. We need discrimination ability to get to the next level, which is identification. Not only do you know that two sounds are different from each other, but can you identify what these sounds are? And then we need that skill to get to the final level, which is comprehension. When audiologists fix the detection problem with hearing aids and cochlear implants, it doesn't mean that people with hearing loss automatically get to comprehension. Some clients get hearing aids, but at the follow-up appointments, they say, I'm still having trouble understanding. When I was fitting hearing aids, I would respond to that by changing the hearing aid settings. This didn't feel entirely right to me because I was often getting further and further away from the prescriptive targets that I used to fit the hearing aids. I was attempting to solve the problem at the level of detection. But what if the issue was elsewhere? When we focus solely on technologies such as hearing aids and cochlear implants in our service delivery and audiology, we're underserving people with hearing loss because we're assuming that they're going to get from detection to comprehension on their own. Who are these people that can't get from detection to comprehension on their own? If we knew that, we would probably want to give these people auditory training, specifically analytic auditory training. The best known analytic auditory training program out there is the Buffalo model. It was developed by Jack Katz, specifically for the remediation of auditory processing disorder, or APD. I don't have any personal or professional experience with analytic auditory training. I did attend an excellent presentation by Dr. Angela Alexander called The Future of Audiology is in the Brain. Dr. Alexander is an audiologist with the Auditory Processing Institute, and she has online master classes for audiologists and speech-language pathologists who are interested in assessing and treating APD with the Buffalo model. Dr. Alexander has a TED Talk called Escaping the Hidden Prison of APD, which has had over 1 million views. Note that APD and hearing loss can coexist. Dr. Alexander has suggested other potential candidates for analytic training through her case studies. So another potential candidate for analytic training are clients with ABIs, or auditory brainstem implants. ABIs are for people who aren't candidates for cochlear implants because of a malformed cochlea or a non-functioning or absent auditory nerve. With the ABI, we're missing the signal processing that happens at the level of the cochlea and the auditory nerve because the implant is located higher up in the auditory system. So it makes sense to me that a person with an ABI would need help with detection, discrimination, identification. Researchers first developed ABIs for people with neurofibromatosis type 2, or NF2. A famous person with NF2 is Matt Hay. He shared his story on an NPR podcast called Soundtrack of Silence, and he has a book with the same name. Matt worked with Dr. Alexander using the Buffalo model and had excellent results with analytic auditory training. People with poor word recognition skills are another group of candidates. Dr. Alexander also used analytic training for an audiologist who had a cochlear implant and a hearing aid. And she presented this fascinating study of her word recognition scores with using the Buffalo model. The analytic training focused on the ear with the hearing aid, which had poor word recognition. After auditory training, the word recognition scores in the ear with the hearing aid approached the scores in the ear with the cochlear implant. And the audiologist wondered if she'd had auditory training before her cochlear implant surgery, would she have gone ahead with a cochlear implant? So there's a need for further research to determine more precisely the circumstances under which analytic training is most useful. So now we'll talk about synthetic auditory training. Recall that synthetic approaches emphasize the understanding of meaning and not necessarily the comprehension of every single word. Synthetic approaches use sentence stimuli rather than sounds, syllables, and words. Let me give you a bit of background on why synthetic training is needed for most people with acquired hearing loss due to age or noise exposure. I have both personal and professional experience with synthetic auditory training programs. Unlike with my hearing loss, which occurred in childhood, with acquired hearing loss due to age or noise exposure, the beginning is subtle. Day by day, the difference is barely noticeable. But over a period of years, the change is significant. Research tells us that the average person with hearing loss waits 7 years to take action. Research also shows that adjusting to gradual hearing loss takes place long before the hearing loss is even acknowledged. We adjust to hearing loss before we even acknowledge that the hearing loss exists. The people around us are adjusting their behavior too, also without explicitly discussing it. Here are some all too common shifts in behavior. Watching TV in a different room from the significant other because the volume is too loud for the other person. Socializing less and for shorter periods of time. If a couple previously enjoyed binging on Netflix series together and had a healthy social life when they first married, these small changes could have an impact on the relationship. Not only that, but maladaptive strategies start to form when communication breakdowns occur. Bluffing in particular is problematic. I've never met a person with hearing loss who didn't admit to bluffing. We all do it. Even people with normal hearing bluff at times. But if bluffing is used as a go-to strategy, there's potential for some problems. First of all, you miss what was said. But also, you know in your heart that you're not being honest with the talker. And remember, because we're not explicitly discussing these adjustments, it's not out in the open. You're hiding something. It's a really disconnecting feeling. If you let the person keep talking, hoping that you'll figure it out somewhere down the line, you risk feeling embarrassed because the talker might discover the bluff later in the conversation. So this is super stressful. Here I am in my 20s at a family reunion, and my dad's family was so big that they had to rent a community hall for reunions, and the noise level was very high. I remember the moment in this photo because I was completely and totally bluffing. I had no idea what my cousin was saying. And without a DM system in those days, bluffing was my go-to strategy. I'm not sure what my cousin was thinking as I stood there looking at him with this blank or somewhat stressed expression. It doesn't feel good. If I'm not responding or not responding appropriately, my conversational partner might think that I'm not interested or not paying attention. In addition to bluffing, withdrawing is also very common as a maladaptive strategy. In the early stages of hearing loss, it might not be full-on withdrawal. Sometimes it's just short periods of giving up or disengaging. Usually this happens because the listening effort is just too high. Disengaging every once in a while can escalate to more frequent withdrawal, especially if the hearing loss goes untreated. Partly because of these maladaptive strategies, leaving hearing loss untreated has serious consequences. In addition to communication problems, hearing loss shows a link with depression, anxiety, social isolation, reduced quality of life, and increased risk for dementia. Any form of intervention that counteracts these risk factors, such as depression, reduced quality of life, etc., can be considered a relevant support for healthy aging. Hearing aids are the most common form of intervention. Auditory training is not so common, but should be presented as an option, especially for people with hearing loss who are not yet ready for hearing aids. According to market tracker data, more than 60% of people with hearing loss do not wear hearing aids. Even if they do get hearing aids, Boothroyd reminds us, there's no guarantees that outcomes with hearing aids will be automatic or optimal. Nor can we assume that there will be a complete return to the pre-loss state. In my experience, parts of the pre-loss state that are not automatically regained have to do with confidence and staying engaged in conversations when the listening effort is high. Some listening habits need to be unlearned. Research has found that when people undergo 12 to 16 hours of auditory training, they develop a sense of mastery over their listening difficulties and more confidence in their listening skills. We often hear this. We hear with our ears, we listen with our brain. What does that even mean? Can you think of an example of how you listen with your brain? Hearing is access to acoustic information. Listening is using acoustic information and focusing on it with intention and attention. This is further enhanced by cognitive skills and finally by communication strategies. Dr. Robert Sweeto, developer of LACE, an auditory training program. Let's break this down. We'll look at intention first. If a person with hearing loss withdraws, intention goes out the window. If they stop trying, they're no longer an active part of the conversation. The conversation continues on, and they're not a part of it. So what's the solution? Reduce the listening effort so that the person with hearing loss does not feel a need to disengage. You can reduce the listening effort with hearing aids, but you can also do that with auditory training. Research tells us that through auditory training, listening effort goes down. How do we know that? How would you measure listening effort? In her research, Dr. Ty Murray studied changes in listening effort after auditory training. And to do this, she measured recall ability. If you're using all of your brain processing power just to listen, you're not going to be able to allocate resources to remember. A week later, a person with hearing loss might not remember the details of a conversation because the details never made it into the person's memory bank. So if there's less effort to listen, you should have a better recall ability. And sure enough, after auditory training, participants in the study had significantly better recall. The listening effort went down. If the listening effort goes down, withdrawing or disengaging should go down too. Let's go back to Dr. Sweeto's definition of listening. Next is attention. Auditory training specifically focuses on selective attention. This is a critical skill for hearing in noise, to be able to focus on the talker and ignore all the other talkers and the surrounding background noise. With normal, healthy aging, older adults become more easily distracted. But older adults are not stuck with these factory settings. Selective attention can be strengthened through auditory training. Next is cognitive skills. Processing speed and working memory are the busy bees here. Processing speed declines with age. Hearing loss also affects processing speed because it takes so much brain power to recognize words that the brain has fewer resources to process meaning. Many older adults are surprised to find out that their auditory processing speed is not fixed. It can be strengthened through auditory training. Which do you think has the greatest impact when it comes to hearing in noise? Your threshold at 4,000 hertz, your age, or working memory? Research shows that working memory is the most significant factor of the three. When you have hearing loss and you hear only part of a word or part of one word and part of another word, you have to rely on your auditory working memory to hold on to these incomplete fragments. It's kind of like the fingerprint matching process you see on crime shows. On the left, in one part of your brain, you have an incomplete auditory fragment. And in the other part of your brain, you have this database of vocabulary words that you're trying to match to. If you can't hold on to these auditory fragments long enough to do a database search, then your listening skills are going to be pretty compromised. Research has found that people with a stronger working memory capacity will hear better in noise. If you're in a situation with a lot of background noise, whether you have hearing loss or not, your working memory capacity is going to take a hit. Hearing loss thus has the potential to affect working memory capacity because hearing loss makes it harder to hear in noisy situations. Working memory can also be strengthened through auditory training. There are 2 synthetic programs out there created specifically for older adults with hearing loss, LACE and Amptify. There are demo versions of LACE and Amptify available online, and I'm hoping you'll be able to have an opportunity to check them out to get an idea of what they offer and whether this is something that you would be interested in working with. LACE was developed by 2 audiologists at the University of California, Dr. Robert Sweeto and Jennifer Henderson-Sabes. Sweeto and Henderson-Sabes were approached by an ex-sound engineer from the Grateful Dead who had just gotten hearing aids. The collaboration between them resulted in an adaptive synthetic program. By adaptive, I mean that the program automatically adapts when the person improves. So with the Buffalo model, the clinician would be adapting the difficulty level. With LACE, the program adapts automatically. Research evidence strongly supports regular personal contact with an audiologist or speech-language pathologist during LACE training to increase the likelihood that the person will finish the program. Why do they need this personal contact and support? I think it's kind of like going to the gym. It just never gets easy. When they improve at a task, the program adapts for their improvement. At least with physical exercise, there's a lot of support out there on social media and with public health messaging, and you get that positive feedback from seeing people around you who are exercising. They're working hard too. But auditory training is a solo endeavor. Most people with hearing loss will never meet another person who is auditory training. I think the main thing is just to push through it. It's meant to be a short-term, intense effort. There's 11 sessions, and each session takes approximately 30 minutes to complete. The effort is worth it, and the results are lasting, except for working memory. Research is showing us that ongoing training may be necessary for working memory. Just so you know, the LACE program provides lifetime access to training with the purchase of an access code. The Amptify program is a newer kid on the block. It was developed by Dr. Ty Murray, an audiologist. Dr. Ty Murray is one of the more prolific researchers in oral rehab. Amptify is adaptive, and it uses both analytic and synthetic approaches to training. Dr. Ty Murray was aware of the research that had been conducted on LACE, indicating that regular contact with a professional was needed. So she incorporated a hearing health coach into the program. Each person is assigned to a coach during the training period, which is generally about 3 months. The coach nudges you when you get behind, as well as provides support for using Bluetooth and remote microphone technology with the computer. Amptify is both analytic and synthetic. The Amptify program will also allow for ongoing training as long as the hearing care provider continues to pay a monthly fee. An audiologist I know that used to use Amptify in her clinic found that her clients still needed support, even with the hearing health coach support that Amptify provides. Both LACE and Amptify program will allow consumers to go directly to the website to purchase access to these programs. This is better than not recommending anything at all. But as I said, most people need support to get to the finish line. Most audiologists do not provide auditory training support and services. So this is an area that's very open for speech-language pathologists to become involved. With the Buffalo model, the clinician has the role of therapist and is responsible for managing the difficulty level so that learning is optimized. With LACE and Amptify, the clinician has more of a role of a coach to support the person with hearing loss to get the most out of the program and to keep going until they finish. So that's it for my presentation on auditory training. You can get in touch with me by email, and I'm also on Instagram and YouTube and LinkedIn. And I would love to hear from you if you have any comments or questions about this presentation. Bye for now.